Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Come in. A disgruntled voice sounded from behind the door. Maria carefully turned the doorknob and slowly stepped inside. Will Wright, the head doctor of the clinic, was sitting at a large table and pretended to study something on the monitor of his work laptop. He didn't look at Maria demonstratively. "Good afternoon, Will Wright. You wanted to see me?" the young woman asked him timidly. Not knowing where to put her hands with excitement, she quickly shoved them into the pockets of her snow white robe. At that moment, the chief physician finally deigned to look up at her, full of irritation and gloating. "Don't you know Maria, Cam?" he asked with a sarcastic chuckle. "By the way, 40 minutes ago I asked you to come in, to quote myself, a very important, urgent matter. But you, as usual, decided again to ignore me." Maria shook her head negatively, and her fine, dark blonde curls bounced around her graceful face like little silk springs. She tried to put all her professionalism into her response and hoped she looked as responsible as possible. I'm sorry, Will Wright, but you know very well that I couldn't leave Aniston's room because she was having problems with her stitches, so I had to supervise." Maria did not have time to finish. The chief doctor slammed his hand on the table and suddenly shouted rudely, "Silence." His face went red in an instant, and his eyes flashed with real rage. "If anyone in this hospital has any control over anything, it's not you. Me, I and only I am the main source of control for all departments, including surgery. Do you understand?" The woman's lips quivered. Surely she wasn't going to get in trouble, but lately you could expect anything from Wright. He just couldn't anticipate his mood every time. "Yes, I understand." Maria could only answer, thinking at the same time how tired she was of this daily humiliation. Wright hated everyone who managed to achieve something in this life by their own. Honest work. So from the first days, Maria became an object of acute hatred from the new chief physician. She finished her residency with flying colors and, as she had dreamed all her life, recently became a surgeon. But she had little practical experience so far. She had not encountered complex cases. Will Wright himself was sincerely convinced that money and high social status ruled the world, whether one was lucky or unlucky to be born with it. In fact, that's how he got into his current job. When the time came, he was simply asked to head the hospital. Wright was the son-in-law of a very high-ranking official in the Department of Health, so his wife, at his request, persuaded her father to facilitate Will Wright's career. Every time he looked at Maria, Wright felt an irresistible urge to say something insulting to her, to point out to this bum her place. Because, can you imagine, she rejected his advances? Him, a man who sincerely believed that any woman would be honored to be his mistress. No, of course, he had no intention of divorcing his wife. But after nearly 15 years of marriage, their feelings had already cooled down and lost some of their former brightness. Mary, however, was not only a darn sight, with her curly hair and golden, as if always a little tanned skin, but she was also an excellent specialist, and that Wright could not forgive her. And now, he just had a brilliant opportunity to finally get rid of this impudent, prideful girl. Of course, we need only talented surgeons. Wright folded his arms across his chest, enjoying the sight of a humiliated subordinate. However, as a fair man, I can't refuse to give you a chance to prove your high qualification. Therefore, your next operation, you will perform it completely by yourself. What? Maria looked at him in surprise. What's confusing you? Wright raised his eyebrows sarcastically. You've assisted in so many surgeries. Can't you handle some miserable peritonitis? Will Wright looked at Camp with a venomous smile. He was determined to set up a woman, and for this, he needed something really serious. For example, a medical error, after which the stubborn employee will certainly not be clean. You mean the homeless man who was brought here less than an hour ago? Maria spoke in a weak voice. But it was agreed that Leonardo Martins would perform the operation. He has much more experience in such severe cases. Peritonitis is a serious thing. The survival rate, even with a perfectly performed operation, is very low. Leonardo Martins himself is not sure if we can save him. The case was very advanced. There, I won't be able to do it alone. Leonardo Martins also needs rest. He's been on his feet for almost 10 hours already. I'll put you on the operation, period. And there isn't much time, by the way, said Wright sarcastically. I think you should start preparing for the operation right away, unless, of course, you want to wait for death. Then I'm afraid your career in our hospital will end very sadly. Maria understood what Wright wanted to accomplish, as well as the fact that she simply had no choice in the matter. All right, Camp said calmly. I understand you very well, Will Wright. With these words, the distraught woman left the chief physician's office, leaving her boss rubbing his hands together. Two. Maria walked down the corridor of the hospital and could hardly hold back the tears coming to her eyes. The young woman was well aware that if she failed to cope with her task, she could forget about medicine forever. It was tantamount to a death sentence for her, because Maria had been going all her life to her dream, to help people and relieve their physical suffering. Our heroine involuntarily plunged into her own memories, although she tried, at the usual time, to think less about the past. All because there was too little good in it, but too many. The hard tests of fate, which Mary had to overcome each time almost alone. Come on, harder three, come on. Catherine Camp, her mother, whipped her, snatching the mop from little Maria and rubbing it into the stairwell in the hallway where they worked. Now that's how you do it, with pressure, so that all the dirt is washed away for sure. Maria looked at her mother's labored hands, and she immediately felt ashamed of herself for not being able to manipulate the heavy buckets of water so deftly and wring out a wet piece of dense cloth with force. The girl sincerely felt sorry for her mother and wanted to help her, but cleaning the floors was not easy for her. Water, and then sought to spill over the edge of the bucket, and the long mop kept slipping out of Mary's hands, because of which the little girl immediately got a firm crack from. Her mother, a few pates. I've been teaching and teaching her, and it's like against the wall. Who do you think you are? So clumsy, Catherine Camp grumbled, redoing Mariah's work. That's it. You'd better get on with it, or we'll be here till tomorrow. I have to go to the store. There's nothing to eat at home again. Every time her mother said she was going to the store, Maria felt a twinge inside. She knew that her mother would surely buy her and her father a couple of bottles of vodka, and that at best all the products would be canned food and bread. Mommy, why don't I go by myself? Maria suggested. Why, I'm an adult now. I'm almost 9. I can buy anything you tell me. Maria knew perfectly well that she would not be sold alcohol because of her age. The woman looked at the girl with eyes full of indignation and anger. And then why do I need your help? Why do you always look at me like I'm some kind of alcoholic? You probably make up the same tales about me and my father at school, too. You little toad. Catherine Camp would start scolding the girl so loudly that almost the entire entryway, where Maria's mother worked as a janitor, would hear it. What an ungrateful bimbo. I'm here, you see, bending over backwards, and she's trying to reproach me with my own vodka. Look at her. No matter what she asked Maria to stop, Catherine Camp took out all her pain and anguish on the girl. And then she calmed down a little and silently went back to work. Maria couldn't understand why her mother herself hadn't noticed how much she'd changed since she'd started drinking. It had been almost 4 years since her father, Henry Camp, had been fired from the factory. The reason was that the man was often late to work, and he came to work more and more under the influence. The bottle turned out to be his only salvation. Only in an altered state could he, at least for a while, distract himself from his everyday problems, having given up and lost all control over the use of alcohol. Henry Camp dragged his own wife with him to the bottom. Each time she got more and more drunk, and very soon she stopped taking care of the house and the family. Sometimes the woman would throw her daughter a couple of small bills, and she would annoyingly remark, "And try to say for once that I am a bad mother for you." Maria didn't have to say anything to this. She just took the money and put it in her little piggy bank. Tomorrow at school, she could use it to buy herself lunch and finally eat her fill at least once a day. As soon as she had enough money, she would go to the little basement thrift store across the street from them and buy herself the cheapest but intact sneakers and some clothes. However, there was one thing the little girl could not cope with: the scornful looks of her classmates who mocked her every time because of her simple, impoverished belongings. The cruel children never missed an opportunity to remind Maria of where she belonged. "Oh, look at Camp!" Someone yelled, "Where did you get those fancy sneakers? Didn't you get them in a dumpster? And how much do the bums sell you now?" Maria sat clenched in her teeth and stared out the window, trying desperately to pretend that she didn't care at all about her classmates' bullying. But in reality, she just wanted to faint from shame and the realization of her own powerlessness and misery. She never said anything about it to her mother, and she wasn't particularly interested. One day, Maria was 10 years old when she was leaving her apartment to go to school, but she suddenly collapsed. Her father and mother were laying down after another drinking spree, so they didn't even notice her passing. As it happened, Maria hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. A girl had skipped lunch in the cafeteria, and her personal money had just run out. The poor girl was constantly drinking water to numb the hunger that was gnawing at her. The girl didn't even really remember how it happened. She seemed to be locking the door, and then everything in front of her eyes suddenly spun around, and then she lost her balance, and everything around her was plunged into darkness. She woke up in the apartment of their neighbor, Grandma Frances. The kind-hearted woman knew at once that the girl needed hot food in the first place. After heating up some chicken broth, Frances Conroy slowly began feeding the dazed Mary. The girl didn't understand what was happening, but she didn't refuse the soup. She was incredibly weak, and she wasn't sure if she could stand up right now. And the broth smelled magical, and the little girl's hungry stomach immediately clenched in a painful spasm. "Eat, darling, eat," the neighbor whispered, putting a wooden spoon with fragrant, steaming broth into the girl's bluish lips. "These idiots no longer care about you at all. All they do is drink all day long. They have no conscience, nothing. They nearly drove their own child to the grave. They're starving him to death. Well, nothing, Maria, nothing. I will not just leave it. I'll call the authorities and they'll shake them up so badly that they won't be satisfied." Maria wanted to say something to the old woman, at least to thank her for her help. But as soon as she ate a few spoonfuls of hot food, she felt her eyelids close on their own. Not more than a couple of minutes later, the girl fell into a deep and healing sleep, and Frances Conroy, meanwhile, was not ceremonious and immediately summoned to their house the authorities of care. When inspectors arrived at the girl's home, they were simply shocked by the situation and condition of the Camp couple. Everywhere in the hallway and the rooms was an unbelievable mess, with broken and empty bottles of cheap liquor lying all over the place. In the living room, the floor was literally strewn with cigarette butts and other unpleasant garbage. There was no food in the refrigerator from the word at all. And in the sink, there was a mountain of unwashed dishes with the remains of food sticking to them, emitting a horrible smell. Catherine and Henry Camp themselves behaved inadequately. They did not understand what right they had to be invaded and what they had done to have their daughter taken away from them. The custody officers immediately called the police, and the drunken troublemakers were taken to the station, where they were duly reported. Soon Maria's parents were deprived of parental rights, and Maria herself was forced by the guardianship service to be placed in an orphanage. Maria had no relatives other than her negligent father and mother. It was especially difficult for the girl in the first few months. It is always difficult for orphanage residents to accept newcomers into their collective. During the adaptation process and in the subsequent life in the orphanage, Maria received a lot of help from a mentor named Terry Morrison. The young woman was one of the few employees of the orphanage who had a warm attitude toward the children and always tried to understand their problems and, if possible, to help them. One day, the teacher noticed with what interest Maria looks at pictures in a large encyclopedia of medicine. "Do you like it?" she asked the girl who was sitting there, studying with curiosity the picture of the device of the human eye. "Very," said the girl with a sigh. "I wish I understood something about it." The woman carefully sat down on a chair in front of the girl and gently stroked her curly blonde hair. "In fact, hardly anyone here watches it. You're the first person in many years to be attracted to this book." "Really?" Maria Lee? Maria was sincerely surprised. "I wondered. I would give anything in the world just to know how our body works. Maybe if I knew more, I could cure my parents." The young woman smiled affectionately. "You can always star in the road to your dreams today." Her mentor saw Maria's interest in medicine, and the girl, who sincerely believed that she could help many people, decided to become a doctor. Terry Morrison helped the young pupil learn new knowledge of medicine. She even brought her books from the regional library. Most of them were atlases of human anatomy and reference books on diseases. When the girl graduated from high school and left the orphanage, a woman helped her prepare for exams. In fact, her teacher became the only person close to her during those years, and Maria was very grateful to her for her support and belief in her abilities. As a result, Maria managed to enter medical school at the first attempt. She wanted to become a surgeon, as this field seemed to her the most interesting over time. After overcoming the really crazy competition, 10 people per place, Maria was able to get a state-funded place right away. She studied well and was considered one of the best students at the university, as evidenced by the certificates and commendations she regularly received from the academic council. Catherine and Henry Camp died shortly after their daughter entered her 3rd year. The daily libations that never ceased in the Camp family eventually brought both spouses to their deaths. They died one after the other, less than 6 months apart. In her final year of university, Maria met Harry. Harry Spencer turned out to be a nice young man who was a parallel course student, but in a different field of study. The boy sat down in the library and asked her permission to use her textbook for a while, because he had forgotten his own at home, and he was supposed to retake his final exam that day. The young people got to talking, and this was the beginning of a mutual affection that soon grew into a real, deep feeling. They walked a lot. They could talk for hours, sitting in the courtyard in the evening and enjoying the glow of the clear spring moon. Maria felt as if she had met her other half, so perfectly matched her idea of the man with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. Except that the young man's parents were adamantly opposed to their future daughter-in-law. That's because Harry came from a very wealthy family. His father, Christopher Spencer, was a well-known businessman in the city, the owner of a chain of home appliance stores. His mother, Valerie Spencer, owned several beauty salons. Parents in every way set their son against Maria, as even in the most terrible dream that Harry would choose to marry a beggar from the orphanage and the daughter of alcoholics. "Harry, please, for God's sake, don't go through with this wedding," his mother urged him on. "The world is full of much more deserving, and most importantly, born into a decent family, girls. You'll find yourself a worthy match." Except that the guy was very determined and was not going to leave his bride under pressure from her parents. "Mom, you just don't understand," Harry tried to explain to her with Maria. "It's like my soul is singing. I've never felt like this before. I love her more than anyone else in the world. She's my only one, my other half." "You're a romantic, Harry," Christopher Spencer sighed sadly in his voice. "She just wants our money. That's all." In response, the son looked at his parents with undisguised disappointment. "Mom, Dad, I love you madly, of course, but I never thought you were so mercenary." Shaking his head, Harry left his parents' house, and for the next few days he lived in his beloved Maria's tiny apartment. And then the bride and groom had a terrible accident. They were returning home in the evening in Maria Harry's car, and because of the rain the day before, the road was too slippery. The guy couldn't cope with the steering wheel. He flew out over the bumpers. She crashed into a lamppost, and Maria immediately lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness in the hospital, she was told that her fiancé was unconscious. Maria was not so badly injured. She got only a slight concussion and a couple of scratches. But Harry was much less lucky. He was immediately taken to the intensive care unit with a severe head injury. After serious surgery, the young man fell into a coma, in which he was in for several long weeks. Unfortunately, when Maria felt better and wanted to visit her lover, her parents would not let her in. Christopher Spencer and Valerie Spencer literally blocked the girl's way, after which they began to shower all sorts of insults on her. "How dare you even come here?" The boy's mother was indignant. "It's because of you that my boy is lying there in a coma. There's no telling whether he'll ever come out of it. Get out of here, you piece of trash. You've made enough of a mess, and now you want to see what you're doing?" "Valerie Spencer, what are you saying?" Maria timidly tried to object. "This accident is an accident. It wasn't anyone's fault. And yet, our son now hangs between life and death," Harry's father said grimly, looking at her. "And you're standing here, alive and well. You're the one who should be dead." "God, how can you?" Maria whispered, looking at the Spencer couple in horror, and hurried back to her room. Soon Maria was discharged, but Harry's parents still wouldn't let her near their son's room. Almost 3 weeks later, Maria made another attempt to find out about her fiancé's condition. What was her surprise when the hospital told her that they no longer had such a patient? The girl's heart fell somewhere down and her eyes went dark. She arrived at Harry's parents' house, and she saw the boy's mother in the yard. What happened? She thought to herself as she approached the wrought iron fence. "Valerie Spencer, good afternoon," she greeted the woman. "It's me, Maria. I'm sorry to come here uninvited, but I really need to know." The businesswoman, seeing her, first went pale, and then her face turned red. Harry's mother's eyes were filled with the most genuine rage. "What are you doing here, you bastard?" she hissed at her. "Have you lost your conscience? I'll call the guards. They'll break your legs. Go away. Valerie Spencer, please." Maria clutched at the wrought iron bar of the high gate. "I just wanted to know how Harry was." Valerie Spencer looked like a snake ready to rush. "They were right to tell you. My son is gone. He's dead. It's your fault." "Satisfied, you bitch." A heavy, bitter lump came to Maria's throat. How did he die?" she could only ask in a husky voice. The woman's eyes lit up with anger and contempt. "And I have to ask you, how did you bring my son to this? You've worn out all his nerves with that damn wedding. Damn you, you daughter of alcoholics. Don't you ever come within a mile of our house again. Understand?" Maria stood frozen in shock for a few more seconds, holding onto the cast iron bars. It seemed to her that if she took even a few steps, she was sure to fall to the ground, unconscious. At that moment, she heard Valerie's heart-rending cry, Get out of here." The girl slowly stepped back, and as if she were half asleep, wandered to the bus stop. Maria could not even get to Harry's funeral. After cursing his mother, the girl finally realized that she had better not appear in the part of town where the businessman lived. The girl suffered terribly from the loss of her lover. At night she could not hold back her bitter sobs and cried into the pillow, while during the day she studied, clenched her teeth, and thought only about the fact that each next day brings her one step closer to the goal, to get a degree in surgery. But everything changed abruptly when, a month or so later, sudden morning sickness and malaise that would not go away forced her to urgently go to the antenatal clinic. Maria's hunch was confirmed. She was pregnant with Harry's child, and now her dreams of graduation seemed to be over. The ultrasound revealed that she was expecting a son. Maria was happy but also anxious at the same time. How would she raise a child alone without any support whatsoever? And yet, in spite of the worries that suddenly fell upon her, Maria understood that all this paled in comparison to the fact that she would have a child with the man she loved. However, fearing that the Spencer elders might harm the child if they found out about it, Maria decided to take a sabbatical from the university, after which she immediately moved to another city, away from her sad past. There, she rented a small apartment half-rented with another girl, Nancy, who was also a newcomer. She was very cheerful and lively, and she and Maria became fast friends. 5 months later, Kalenka was born, a healthy and sweet little boy. The neighbor helped Maria a lot looking after her baby from time to time, because she worked from home, while Maria herself was working as much as she could to pay the rent and make ends meet. When Maria's son grew a little older, Maria returned to her hometown, to her parents' apartment. Having recovered with great difficulty in the university, our heroine graduated with honors and received the long-awaited diploma. Almost immediately, the young mother got a job in the city hospital where she did her residency. But no one took Maria seriously at first. She had no experience at all. She was entrusted with the simplest surgeries and patients, so that Maria was soon able to build up enough practice, but she was still not allowed to take on more complex cases. One day, it so happened that Maria was invited to assist an eminent doctor. His surgical nurse was unable to work that day, so Maria was asked to fill in for her. During the operation, the nationally renowned surgeon was simply amazed by Maria's professional skills. She turned out to be an excellent assistant, which he did not fail to tell Stanley Harrison, the then head physician of the hospital. It was he who suggested to Rogozin that the young surgeon should be promoted to a higher category. Mark my words, Stanley Harrison. This young lady has a very bright head and a steady hand. It's been a long time since I've worked with such great personnel. She'll do well. From that moment on, the chief physician paid Maria close attention. Over time, he became convinced that the surgeon was right and assigned her to assist in more and more serious and complex surgeries. Maria was glad that she was finally noticed, but she was even more warmed by the fact that her actions helped the people on the operating table. With a good salary, Maria was able to buy him and Matthew a new apartment. She sold the apartment she had inherited when her parents died, so she was able to make the first mortgage payment on their new home. Only Maria had no idea that the hardest trials were ahead of her. That all changed when Harrison was transferred to another hospital and replaced by a younger, more cunning one. This shrewd manager did everything he could to make an extra penny. Everyone who did not agree with him quickly dismissed with a pretty tarnished reputation. The new head doctor was not ashamed of stealing powerful drugs, because on the black market, these drugs will cost 3 times more than the price at which they were sent to the hospital. And he certainly wasn't going to miss out on the benefits he had discovered. When Wright announced to Maria that she would have to operate on the Tramp herself, it was as if something broke inside her. The woman knew that Wright would not give up. He was determined to get rid of her, and by the most heinous means. If the unfortunate patient died during the operation, and then the theft was discovered, her career as a surgeon would literally be over. However, at that moment, Maria could not allow herself to give in to dark thoughts. There was a homeless man waiting for her, whose life hung in the balance. If God willing she could save him, then maybe she could solve the problem of the stolen drugs somehow. When the patient was prepared for surgery, Maria came out of the medical ward fully dressed in her surgical uniform, collected, and as calm as possible. However, when she looked at the patient, who had already been injected with anesthesia, she instantly broke into a cold sweat. Harry was lying in front of her on the operating table, her ex-fiancé, who she had thought was dead all those years ago. The most surprising thing was that Harry recognized Maria too, even with the medical mask that hid half her face. The headmistress felt her heart begin to pound in her chest, beating out in time with only, how could it be? And is he really alive? Harry stared at her in amazement for several long seconds before the anesthetic took effect, and Maria pulled herself together and fisted her composure to begin the operation. Harry's situation was extremely difficult. For nearly 7 hours, Maria had been fighting for his life. Inside her, at that moment, everything trembled, and it took a truly Herculean effort to remove all her emotions and feelings and to operate on her beloved as if she were performing an operation on any other patient. Maria's hands worked firmly and confidently. She squeezed and sealed the torn vessels, millimeter by millimeter, trying to prevent the final perforation of the thin walls of the mucosa. Harry almost died of internal bleeding. Only by miracle, she managed to prevent it. Finally, the operation was over. Harry had been saved, and Maria's heart, after she put aside the bloody instruments, was beating so fast that she thought she was going to faint. When she emerged from the operating room, her hands were shaking and her service uniform was wet all over. She still couldn't believe that she had just saved the life of the man she loved, the only one she had ever truly loved. Harry spent the next few weeks in the intensive care unit, under the close supervision of doctors and Maria herself. It was only when he was transferred to the general ward that his ex-fiancée dared to come in and talk to him. "How is it, Harry?" Maria asked, not ashamed of her tears. "I thought you were dead, never coming out of your coma." In response, the young man looked at her in surprise. "What? Where did you get that from, Maria? It was you who left me." By the way, I never understood why. It was time for Maria to be amazed. She looked at him with wide eyes. "Harry, I never left you. I'm telling you, your mother told me, Valerie Spencer, never to come near your house again. Like, I got you in that accident, and you died." For a few moments, there was a ringing silence between the lovers, and then Harry shook his head sadly. "God, so it was my mother and father after all. They divorced you and me, Maria. I can't believe they did that to you." As it turned out, Harry's parents told their son that his fiancée had left him almost as soon as she regained consciousness. They said she looked at him lying unconscious and told them that she didn't need such an invalid husband. Harry was too weak to resist their influence, so he took their word for it, though he suffered terribly and wondered what he had done to deserve it. They had deliberately lied to Mary about his death. They would have done anything to keep her out of the family. But fate punished them anyway, Harry said thoughtfully. "I married one of those brides my parents asked me to marry. She was a party girl, and that's not what I wanted, as you know." The man sighed heavily. "Then my father went bankrupt, and they took all of our property without a trace. Before that, his competitors systematically started zeroing out his business. So he took out loans in order to get out of it, but he couldn't. A year after we, literally, put on the street, my father died of a heart attack. He couldn't accept the fact that we were no longer rich." Harry grinned bitterly and finished his sad story. "Mom is now in a hospice for the critically ill, and the doctors say she doesn't have long to live." "What about you?" Maria couldn't resist asking. "How did you become homeless? Honey, I can't believe this happened to you. And I'm so sorry for your parents, even though they did so much damage to us. Maria, somehow lost in this life," said her ex-fiancé honestly, and tears began to glisten in his eyes, which he quickly wiped away with his fist. Everything suddenly became so meaningless. No parents, no money, no one close to me. I thought that nothing good was waiting for me anymore. I started drinking and then drunkenly gave my apartment to black realtors. That's how I ended up on the street. Honestly, I thought I was going to die until I met you." The lovers embraced tightly, and Maria looked intently at Harry. "Harry, now you have a meaning in life," she began. Slowly, "now you have me and—" "What?" He couldn't believe what he heard. "Yes, Harry, you and I have a son, Matthew. He's almost 5 now. He's wonderful, and he looks just like you." At this point, Harry could not hold back tears, and taking Maria's hand in his, he began to cover it with kisses. "Maria, my darling, how could it be? Did I miss my whole fatherhood?" Maria only smiled happily, though through her tears, and then said softly, "You'll have a lot of catching up to do. If that's what you want, of course. Will you come back to us, Harry?" He looked at her in amazement. "Do you still have to ask? I won't let you go from here to there. I'll be with you every day." The very next day, Maria gave Wright her letter of resignation. She did not want to spend another minute in the hospital, where she was just at risk of being framed and imprisoned. The chief physician was at first reluctant to sign a statement, but in the end he let Maria go, though he was tearing up and tearing down. After all, it was not in his best interest to announce the theft of medicines, hanging all the dogs on camp, because if it became known, the chief physician would inevitably be tortured with endless inspections. After quitting the hospital and finding the man she loved, the woman soon found another, much better, paying job at a private clinic. Now she gets 5 times more money than in her previous place, and she is respected and appreciated by everyone. Harry was able to confirm his qualifications, and then he got a job at the same clinic where his wife is now working. The man, by profession, was a certified radiologist, and now he, like Maria, helps people. The lovers finally got married, and now they are raising their young son together. They thank heaven for every day they spend together and make big plans for their future together. As for Wright, he was head of the hospital after Maria's departure for a very short time. The department lost, in the person of Maria, the most valuable specialist and all indicators of surgery, immediately collapsed down. Complaints from patients began, and the remaining specialists lacked Maria's famous sense of smell, thanks to which even the most complex surgeries were always successful. And then the ministry got to Wright after all. The missing medical supplies, which he had so successfully tried to pin on a former subordinate, had finally come to light, and no amount of connections to Will Wright's wife helped him keep his job. The inspection, which unexpectedly came to the office of the chief physician in the middle of the day, found those same ampoules with drugs in Wright's personal safe, where he was hiding them, waiting for him to contact a buyer who had already found a buyer for these drugs. The man was permanently dismissed from medicine with a wolf ticket and arrested because he committed a real crime. Wright faces a trial and a long prison sentence. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.